Hi everyone and welcome to Creative Cakes by Sharon. Today I'm doing the cute little character Jake from Jake and the Neverland Pirates. So let's get started. I've got a template of Jake's face here and you can get a copy of this template in the comments section of this tutorial, and I've also got an 8-inch cake here that's been cooked and cooled down. So you can see when I put the template on top of the cake there isn't really much waste. So now I'll grab a sharp knife and cut around the template and get rid of the excess cake. Guys, most of my character cake tutorials will be done using an 8-inch tin, and this is simply because they're easily accessible and it saves you from having to go out and buy a whole range of cake tin sizes. And if you use my templates you'll also reduce the amount of waste of the cake. So here you can see I've just filled the center of my cake with some white chocolate ganache that I had already prepared, and now I'm just going to put the top piece on and cover the entire cake with the same chocolate ganache, making sure you get it nicely into the sides. Try and cover it as smoothly as possible, and then we're going to put it into the fridge to set for about 15 minutes so that the chocolate ganache gets nice and firm to the touch. While I've got the cake in the fridge, I've got some dark blue fondant here, and this blue is almost the exact same colour as Jake's jacket, and I'm going to use this to cover the board for the cake. If you'd like to see a detailed tutorial on how to cover a cake board, you can click on the link that you see now and that will take you to one of my other tutorials on how to cover your board properly. Now that I've taken the cake out of the fridge, I can feel that it's not tacky and the ganache is not sticking to my finger. I've got a boiling hot cup of water here, some paper towel and an offset spatula, and I'm just going to stand my offset spatula in the boiling water and then wipe off any excess water and smooth the top and sides of my cake. I keep doing this until I'm happy with the surface and that I've got nice sharp edges around all of the sides of the cake. Now I can grab my template and you can see that I've cut the bandana off the top of the template, and this is because we're going to work on creating the face. So I'm just taking a little palette knife, or you could use a toothpick, and just make a little indentation across the top of the stencil. I'm also going to use the back of a paintbrush to rub a little bit of a line over the top of Jake's nose so that it makes a little bit of a mark into my ganache. And the reason for this is because I'm going to use some of the flesh coloured fondant to create a little nose shape for Jake, and this is going to protrude through the top layer of our fondant so that his nose is raised on the cake. So this gives it a little bit of a three-dimensional aspect and really quite cute. So once I'm happy with the shape of the nose, I'm going to grab my template and create a little ear for Jake in the same way that I did the nose. So once I'm happy with the shape, I just stick it to the ganache and move on to now rolling out my fondant so that I can use it for Jake's face. And once I'm happy with my fondant rolled, I place the template on top, preferably up the top of the fondant so that I can cut around, and with a pizza cutter I go along the top of the stencil and about 2 inches below the bottom of the stencil. This is because this is the part that's going to go on the sides of the cake. So gently I just put my fondant onto my roller, and when I grab the cake I'm going to line up that little indentation we made at the top of the cake with the top of my fondant and gently position the fondant onto the cake. And then now using my hands I quickly go along the edges of the cake, smoothing the fondant down. I also use a smoother to get a nice finish at the bottom, and then with a sharp blade I'm just going to trim off all the excess fondant. Now using the bottom end of a paintbrush I'm going to create 2 nostrils for Jake by pressing gently into the fondant. Try not to poke the fondant very hard to begin with, just create the nostrils with a little bit of pressure, gradually making the indentation deeper. Now I'm going to work on Jake's spiky hair, and this part of the stencil is on a separate page to the face because they both don't fit on the one page, but they're both available in the links below. And basically I just cut out the shape of his hair and roll out some black fondant to about 3 or 4 mil thick. I don't know if you can see that there, but I don't want it too thin because I need it to be nice and strong. So I just place the template on top of the fondant and trace around it. removing all the excess. I'm just going to take a moment here to smooth the edges of Jake's hair so there are no rough edges. Now I'm not going to put the hair on straight away. I want it to dry in the shape of the top of his head, so I'm just going to show you, perhaps if I turn this around, I'm going to place the black fondant up against the top end of the cake so that the hair actually takes the shape and form of the top of Jake's head. And then I want to remove the cake and grab a few pieces of wire and gently insert them into the hair. While I do this, I'm very careful not to change the shape of the hair. And now I'll carefully move this off to the side to dry. I'm now going to work on covering the top half of the cake with some black fondant, so it's the top and the front side. So I'm just going to roll out some black fondant, which is going to act as Jake's hair, and I'm going to grab my stencil and place it to the bottom end of the fondant I've rolled, and using my pizza cutter cut along the edge of the stencil, and then pick it up and join the black fondant with the flesh coloured fondant and gently smooth down the sides. And when you get to the join over the ears, you'll be able to feel the flesh colour fondant under the black. So with my blade I cut along that line that I can feel underneath. So you can see that I feel around for where the join is and then use my blade to make a straight cut. You might need to smoothen off those joins with your hand and then trim off all the excess black fondant and use your smoother to get a nice smooth finish. Before I put the black fondant away, I'm just going to cut all the other little pieces out of the template that we need in black fondant. So that's his little sideburn, his two eyebrows and both eyes. I've just placed the little pieces of the stencil onto the cake so that they're out of the way while I roll out the black fondant. So I'm going to start with his little sideburn. I just have to trace around that, and using the other part of the stencil as a guide, I'm going to position the sideburn in place, and I just used a little bit of water to make sure it sticks. So now I'm just going to repeat that process for the eyebrows. Once you've cut the eyebrows out, or any of the other pieces, make sure you smooth the edges nicely, because sometimes when they're cut with a blade you get a little bit of a rough edge. Now for the eyes, to create the shadow and outline of Jake's eyes, I've cut the two black circles out first and positioned them in the stencil. Very carefully now, I'm just going to cut out the very edge of the eye, which was the outline of the eye, because that's the part that we're going to do in white. And before I do that, I'm just going to wash my hands, because after middling with the black fondant, my hands are all covered with black. Now I can work on rolling the white fondant out and cutting out the two circles for the white parts of his eyes. I'll then just position them onto the black section we already cut out. Now I can move the stencil up onto the cake and position the sections of the eyes that we've done so far onto the cake. Moving on to the iris now, I'm just going to cut out the next section of these eye stencils, and I've created a hazel colour because Jake has hazel colour eyes, so I've just rolled together some brown and green fondant so it looks more like hazel eyes. So now I just copy the same procedure by using the stencil to cut around the circles and positioning that onto the cake. The last bit of detail for the eye is to create a reflection, and you can do this by simply rolling out two little white balls of fondant and securing it to the top of the eyes. Now that I'm happy with the placement of all of the eye components, I just quickly go and adhere them with some water on a paintbrush. Now it's time to cut out the last remaining piece of the stencil, which is Jake's mouth. And once I've done this, I'm going to roll out some pink fondant and cut out the shape of his mouth. And after this, we will create his teeth by rolling out some white fondant and using the stencil as a guide to create a top and bottom row of teeth. It's now just a matter of securing the mouth to the face with a little bit of water. To create the outline and the cheeky little grin for Jake, it's just a matter of rolling out a piece of black fondant into a very long snake and positioning it on the outside of the mouth to create an outline. Don't forget to add a tiny little piece of black fondant at one corner of his mouth to give him that cheeky little grin. I can create Jake's bandana now with some red fondant that I have to roll out, and then using the stencil trace around that with the blade and fix it onto the top of the cake. Then using the back end of paintbrush, I'm just going to make some indentation lines to make it look like the creases of the fabric. To make the tied ends of the bandana, I simply just cut out two leaf-like shapes and a strip across and fasten them onto the sides of the bandana. I use the straight long piece of fondant to create the knot of the bandana and using the paintbrush to create some more wrinkles in the fabric. You can see here I've just used my little rolling pin to support the ends of the bandana just for a few minutes until it dries. Now I'm going to grab my board and slowly place my cake onto the board. I'm just going to once again use my rolling pin to support the ends of the bandana. Now carefully I can pick up Jake's spiky hair and insert it into the cake, and it's going to line up perfectly with the top of his head. Because I chose a nice dark blue for the board, which was the same colour as Jake's jacket, I'm going to use this bright yellow fondant to cut out the letters of his name to give a beautiful contrast to the board and also act as a highlight like the trimming on his actual jacket. Finally, I'm just using a little bit of pink luster dust to create a little bit of highlight for Jake's cheeks, and I'm just going to use this lightly and gradually build up a nice tone that I'm happy with. And now I have the finished product. Jake from Jake and the Neverland Pirates. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more great video updates.